Welcome to another episode of Start the Week with Wisdom. I'm your host, Bridget Burns with the University Innovation Alliance.
And I am Sara Custer, the Editor-in-Chief at Inside Higher Ed.
Each week, we bring you a short interview with a leader in the field that is uplifting and designed to distill a sense of their perspective and their wisdom to hopefully set you up on a Monday to have a great week and get some perspective, leadership, learning, insights to round out give the Monday the best shot you can possibly have. So that's why we call it Start the Week with Wisdom.
And the show Weekly Wisdom is sponsored by Mainstay, the student engagement and retention platform proven to work through peer-reviewed research, like when it helped Georgia State reduce summer melt by 21%, or in another study when Mainstay helped GSU retain 1,200 students. Check out the research and learn more at mainstay.com.
The show is also broadcast on the Innovating Together podcast, which is sponsored by the Carnegie Corporation of New York. So we're grateful for their investment and support.
And we are very grateful to today's guest for joining us today. This is Laura Bloomberg, the president of Cleveland State University. President Bloomberg, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
It's wonderful to have you. I think one thing that we are interested in learning about on Weekly Wisdom is just hearing about people's influences and if there's a person or specific experience that's really informed your leadership style.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think about that, and there's actually a lot of people who have informed my leadership style, but this is maybe not what you're going to expect me to say. But my husband and I have 4 little grandchildren. And I spend as much time as I possibly can with those little kids. And they inspire me every day. They motivate me, but also I learn a lot about leadership and influence. And how is it that you can think about discovering the world with fresh eyes through them? So they are, in many ways, my influence. I have 2 grandkids staying with us this week, and I'm actually looking down. I have Play-Doh on my dress, so I know that I was part-time grandma and part-time president today. And that's a really important thing. There's this other thing that I think about a lot, and it's I'm going to sound a bit like a name dropper, and I really don't intend to be, but I had formerly been the dean of the Humphrey School at the University of Minnesota, and one of our wonderful adjunct professors was former Vice President Walter Mondale. And here he was. I think of him as the Vice President of the United States, a presidential candidate, albeit a failed presidential candidate, but a pretty big darn deal. He would show up with his coffee from McDonald's and sit in our atrium for an hour or so before he would teach his class, just so that he could meet with students, if anybody would have the time to want to sit and talk with him and tell him about their lives. And here was this big deal guy. He didn't have anybody escorting him. He was well into his 80s, drove himself to campus, paid for parking, came in with the coffee that he bought, and just hung out with students. And he inspired me every single day. I had the honor of emceeing his 90th birthday party, and he surrounded himself with people who were like that, who maybe had big titles and big jobs and high profiles, but who were just folks. And that to me is an enormous leadership lesson.
I think I love that. And I think people love that anytime you can find out that someone who is, afar and on a pedestal is just super normal and chill and human. And those are the best stories that give us that kind of context.
Yeah, he was one of our most beloved teachers. The students loved taking classes from him because he told stories, but not like, well, then I was presiding over this, big thing at the Hague. It was more like when I sat down with the Secretary of State and tried to solve a problem, here's what was really challenging, and here's how we addressed it. And it was just, his stories were so accessible to students, and that speaks a lot to the kind of person he was and why he motivated me.
Oh, that's nice. So you've had a very extensive experience both at previously at Minnesota and then in here at Cleveland State, where you were both the provost and the president. I feel like you've probably worked with a lot of leaders, but you've also seen in the higher ed landscape, you've probably seen and learned from leaders at other institutions and other organizations. So just casting a broad net.
Yeah.
Do you feel like for you, is it seeing good examples that you've learned the most from, or bad examples of what not to do have taught you the most about kind of leadership?
Wow, I gotta say, it's even. It's both. I don't know if I would, say one outweighs the other. And here's why. You'd like to say I learned from great examples, but I've also seen people try to emulate a leader that they admired. And we all have to find who we are for ourselves as well. So sometimes I learn from good examples, but it doesn't work for me unless I try it on for me and make sure that it fits my approach and my style. But I do learn from people who I really admire. I also, though, learn from people who I think that didn't work, or I can see that that's not going to work, or why do they have to be so mean to get their work done? And that motivates me too. I don't have a lot of patience, candidly, as a leader for people who are rude or disrespectful. It's not my jam. It's never worked for me to motivate people by being disrespectful or not treating people well. And when I see it, I learn again and again and again that that's a strategy that I will try never to follow. So it's both the good and the bad, for sure.
I think to me, Laura, just that paired with what you told us for your first, the response to our first question about Walter Mondale, and then even your grandkids, it seems to me that like authenticity and kindness might be two leadership values that are really your guiding principles.
I think that's a huge part of it. I have to be who I am. I was on a panel years ago about leadership for a bunch of young people. This was it was like a model UN kind of forum. So hundreds of high school juniors and seniors. And I was one of two leaders on the panel. And one of the leaders would stand up and say, there are 5 things you must do to be a great leader. And he'd rattle off these 5 things. And he's no longer there, so I will say it. He was a senior executive at Target Corporation. And he said, and you always have to be upbeat, and you always need to do this, and you can never do that. And I sat there thinking, oh, these poor kids, how are they going to find their own voice? Mm-hmm. And so I tried to be respectful in the moment, but I also said, here's a leadership lesson for all of us. We don't all have to agree all the time. And that's not how I think about leadership. I don't think about the 5 things I must do, or the 3 Ps, or the, all what I wear when. I think about being the truest, most authentic version of myself I can be. And if that means I'm not the right leader for the position, then I shouldn't be in the position. But I can't put on somebody else's clothes. I can't put on somebody else's persona and try to be a strong leader. So, yeah, authenticity seems key to me.
Mm-hmm. I don't know how I somehow missed this, that you were a professor of leadership and management, and you also you were the head of a center around integrative leadership. So now I'm like, okay, all right. These questions, I'm like, this is good. But I'm curious about, obviously you're leading at the time when you're a center director, and you are leading in significant ways when you're in the front of a classroom. I'm just curious about when you really apply leadership as a dean for the first time today and present, like when it really puts the theory to practice test. I'm curious about if there were things that you saw in the literature or that you'd studied and that you thought about from, looking at the literature and the research that then either surprised you as not being as important when you became a leader, or it just totally validated that you were right all along?
So there's a lot. I didn't use just leadership theory and leadership scholarship as I taught and as I led the Center for Integrative Leadership. I also used things like poetry and what have we learned from history and how people capture history. But there's one person whose leadership work has deeply impacted me, and that's Dr. Ron Heifetz and his view of adaptive leadership and technical leadership. And everything that I studied and I learned about adaptive leadership and technical leadership bears true in my own life as a leader. That the more complicated the problem, the more challenging the opportunity that is presented to you, it's hard to get there, the less we can do it alone. The more we have to be comfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty, broadening the circle of people who are involved, and being generous with the information that we have so other people have it and can work with the same set of tools, essentially. That, to me, is a leadership school of thought, a leadership theory that every single day of my life, I think it impacts me. So the technical leader who says, I can do these things, I have 10 steps, I can work the plan. Oftentimes they can go it alone. They don't need an interdisciplinary team. But the really big challenges we grapple with, and heavens knows we've got really big challenges in higher education right now, we need a multitude of players with a multitude of backgrounds and a multitude of ways of looking at the world to come together and help us figure our way through this. That's adaptive leadership. And that I learned from the work of Ron Heifetz. And a lot of observation.
That feels like, I can't imagine that technical leadership really, especially given the complexity of today and the presidency, I can't imagine that really, you can't really stick with a plan. Bless your heart. And I mean that in the Southern way. Really, and watch it. That is actually one of the things I am seeing about leaders is their ability to kind of roll with the punches and there's a high control type of leader that really needs to be like everything has to stick to the exact plan, that they become more anxious and more, I guess, less inspiring. The more that the plan has to adapt. And then you have the ones who just kind of roll with it and like they're unfazed. It's just like the unflappability, I think, is the most like important resilience characteristic that I am seeing especially in this moment in the presidency.
It's key. And, I think that my observation of human nature is sometimes when we feel most vulnerable, most out of control or lacking in control, not like I'm out of control, hair on fire, but like I can't control this situation. The most candidly scared is when we try to circle the horses and say, I got this, I'm going to become the command and control person. That's the least adaptive thing we can do. But I think so many ways when you aspire or you climb in leadership and authority, people assume that you got your act together all the time. I'll say act together, but you know what I mean. So it feels a little scary to say, I'm not sure of what we should do right now, but collectively, let's work on this. Or I have an idea, but it may not be the best idea. So we share a round of ideas. That's very different than the command and control leader that says, I got this. This is the way it's going to be. You all just get in line and do what I tell you to do. It's so tempting to want to do that sometimes. But if you have a real adaptive problem, it's the most dysfunctional thing I think we can do is to adopt that command and control approach.
We do. At Inside Hired, we spend a lot of time speaking with leaders and a lot of prospective leaders, and the role of the presidency has got, it just seems a bit like a poison chalice these days. So I'm curious to know, what inspired you to take this job, and I don't know, what any advice would you give to people out there who are maybe interested, maybe considering it, but just kind of see what a difficult gig it is these days?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of difficult jobs. There's no denying the fact that this is a hard job and it's at a hard time, and it may never have been this stressful in the past. I think that is perhaps all true. I can't independently verify it, but it seems to be true. But, it's also really hard to be an elected official in the age of social media. There's a lot of jobs that my daughter is an urban serving physician doing urgent care in an area that is extremely underserved. She's got a hard job, and hers is life and death some days. So I put that in perspective, and that's not to make light of what you're asking me, but it helps me to put it in perspective. I also think it's a damn great job to have. I feel like if I do it right, I get to touch the future every single day. Every single day, I have the opportunity to make a difference in the lives of students who are going to go on and be future whatever, journalists, entrepreneurs, physicians. And that might sound like happy talk, but honestly, if I start the day every day thinking, oh my God, this job is so hard and it's kicking my butt and it's demoralizing, that's how I'm going to live my life that day. If I start my day thinking I have 13,000 students, sure, I wish there were 18, but I don't have 18 right now. Okay, those 13,000 students still need me to be the best version of myself I can be. And when I think about my opportunity to impact them, it makes it easier to navigate the day. That doesn't make it easier to solve the problems, but I forgive myself on a regular basis. And then the other thing, I think a lot about when I think about how hard it is to be a president right now is, why not me? Why not me? Someone needs to be doing this job. Why shouldn't it be me? I'm qualified. I'm passionate about education. I'm not driven by power. I'm driven by the notion of an education environment. So why not me? Because if it weren't me, what if it was somebody who was just driven by power? It was a stepping stone. They were going someplace else, all of those things. So I think, okay, I can live with a tough job. I'm not going to do it perfectly, but I'm going to choose to have fun along the way. I'm going to choose to support my team in taking care of themselves, and we'll do the best we can do in this moment.
That's great. I think it's you're illuminating just how critically important it is to police your own mind as a leader, more so than any other job, because those other jobs might have more technical aspects, more physical labor, more grueling experiences. But if you as a leader are not making sure that you can come to work with a positive kind of frame of mind and a perspective or a vision that people want to follow, like, you can bum out an entire org chart very quickly. And I mean, I think about the kids who are affected at dinner when their parent comes home from working for someone who's a terrible leader with a negative attitude, and that ruins that kid's next week, right? Like, just the after effect. But I love the idea of really thinking about and prioritizing kind of a positive mindset as a leader and kind of feeding your mind to some degree, because I think sometimes as you're navigating complex decisions, I doubt you feel like you have the time for the personal development to really frame everything for the week.
I just want to scream when somebody says, and then after my workout this morning and yesterday morning and the day before, I'm like, you make time to work out every morning. I aspire to that. None of us get everything right that we want, but I will every single morning without fail think about why I choose what I'm going to do today, why I choose to do this work. That to me is, now, if I could get on the treadmill every day too, that would be good. But you can't do it all.
I wonder, Laura, you were talking a little bit about being unflappable, and you seem to kind of have this optimism, but I don't know if optimism is the right word for it. But I wonder if those are like skills that you have intentionally developed throughout your leadership career, or if that's just part of Laura.
Maybe it's a little bit of both. I don't think I'm all, sunshine and rainbows as a person. I'm more determined. Some people would actually say I'm pretty serious. Like I'm not organizing fun gatherings for my cabinet. We're working together, but we're working together because we have a purpose. So some of it is learned. Some of it's, if I could just tell you quickly, I'll be brief, but I have one of the things I tell aspiring young leaders all the time is to cultivate mentors. Mentors are essential to all of us. And I probably will retire from this job. So I'm late in my career. I still cultivate mentors. And I have a mentor. I kid you not, if you look at my LinkedIn page from July 4th, you'll know this is true, who is 103 years old. And this man has navigated, I mean, imagine, he was an adult for World War II. He's watched some of his children grow old and die, and he is still here with us. He has seen pain and suffering through decades of his life, and he chooses optimism every single day. Even now at 103, when just about every system isn't working well, but his mind is, he is still saying, here's what we need to do to address climate change. Here's what we need to do to make things better for my great-grandkids. And wow, if he can bring it when everything hurts and he can barely swallow anymore because he's 103 years old and he's still choosing forward momentum and optimism, I can do it. He's my role model.
I love that. You're just helping me see this. Part of the reason why I find this show so valuable is that there aren't enough conversations about how it is you became a leader, because I think there are a lot of people who are wondering if they could aspire to the presidency or not. And if you think about the structure of higher ed, to become a president, rarely have I seen someone lead their way into it. Sometimes I've seen people just survive. That's the rule. Like, you survive the chair, you survive being dean, you survive being provost, and now you get to be considered to be a president. Like, it's rare to see like that. It's actually like, visionary leadership, and you advance this plan, and it's really, because sometimes it's just so difficult. You see the complexity of these jobs that it's that seeing how people also along the way learn how to be a leader and how they navigate surviving these highly complex jobs where the conflict feels incredibly huge, but it's actually quite small.
Yeah.
Like the chair position, for instance, that for me is the most, that's the hardest job at the university, I think, because the conflict, all the players and they know you and they have your email address and they also come by your office. And whereas you can have a little bit of a buffer at some of the higher level jobs. So anyway, I feel like you're exposing that there is a need for a curriculum around leadership to some degree to lead people to the presidency, because otherwise we're just going to have people who are really good at managing and who are really good at navigating bureaucracy and surviving, which are all important skills. But I think people also want to be led. They also want to be inspired. And I don't know that we actually have an intentional curriculum to build that path.
I don't think we do. And I think you raise a really good point. In one of the hardest transitions, I think, of going from being a faculty member, in my case, I had another career too in K-12 education. So I've been a urban high school principal, all of those. And then I become a dean, and, the trajectory you outline. One of the things that I think is really hard is to make a pivot from managing to leading, from techniques or tactics to strategy, from driving strategy to leading a team that will drive strategy. All of those things in some ways is pulling back from what maybe got any of us into education in the first place, which is being in the classroom. So there are days people say, do you miss teaching? And I think, yeah, I miss teaching every day. And I was an award-winning leadership professor. And I could go back into the classroom and teach a class. I know presidents who do. But for me, I don't want to criticize that at all. But for me, I have to ask myself, is that what the community needs me to do? Is that the highest use of my time right now? Or is my time now best used in nurturing others? There's not a curriculum to help us think about that moving away and continuing to nurture ourselves with the things that we love. And I think that's a really important thing to talk about. When I talk about, when the doors are closed and I'm just talking to fellow deans or fellow presidents, I did this a lot as a dean too, and sometimes very specifically to other women who are presidents. Those are the things that we talk about. How are you doing making that pivot to, in some ways being more of a servant leader than you've ever had to be before? and how are you nurturing yourself and so that you can thrive in that environment. We need to do a better job of focusing on that, I think.
Yeah. I find as you get, as you kind of climb the ranks a little bit, one thing I found is a difficulty in understanding like what is success and what is productivity. It shifts the more you pull back and become a service leader. And I wish people would talk about that more.
Yeah. And I think we all like productivity. We all like to end the day and go, that was a really good day. And again, back to adaptive challenges and Ron Heifetz, adaptive challenges are not ever really resolved. We just move them forward. We just make things better. But for me, you know what I do when I grapple with, I need a sense of productivity and I'm not getting it in work? I mow my lawn. Ooh. I love mowing my lawn. You go, that's a row that's done. I'll even stop and think, okay, am I going to go diagonally this time? North to south, east to west.
Love language. I don't have a lawn, but it's so satisfying.
And then it's so satisfying and it's done. And you can scratch that itch and then you can go back to grappling with all the ambiguous stuff
that's a really good piece of advice.
And besides, it smells really good when you do it.
Yes.
So my version is, and I noticed that I only have the energy to do really difficult things that I want to put off because there's something more difficult to do. So it's decluttering a drawer, just one drawer, just pick one drawer.
And so if you think I've got to do the whole house, it feels overwhelming. But one drawer, you knock that baby off and go, wow, I have really been productive.
Yeah.
Good job, me.
Pat on the back.
So we have our rapid fire final questions.
Okay.
The first, I feel like you know these just because of the conversation thus far. So number one is the best piece of advice that you received in your career that you kind of go back to as a touchstone most frequently. Who gave it to you?
There are always good ideas and bad timing. Think about windows of opportunity when you make strategic decisions. Mm-hmm. That is a piece of advice I follow all the time. Windows of opportunity are real. And they close and open.
I'm writing this one down.
And who gave it?
Oh, go ahead.
A professor of mine. Professor when I got my PhD in ed policy and leadership.
All right.
Okay. What is the advice you most consistently give to others who aspire to leadership?
Know who you are and follow your heart.
All right. This
sounds
is good.
Simple, but
love it.
The last question, which I'm hoping you have like a whole ton for us, perhaps, is
maybe written all of them.
Yeah. The leadership. Is there a leadership or professional development book, or just a book in general, that is like a touchstone for you that you find yourself most often recommending to other people when they're thinking about leadership?
Well, I like I said, I love Ron Heifetz's work. Leadership Can Be Taught is about him, which is interesting. Somebody's studying his teaching technique at Harvard. But when I think about leadership, I often go to biographies or autobiographies. I think so many people have talked about A Team of Rivals, but I do think it's an absolutely brilliant leadership book about Abraham Lincoln. But the one that moves me more than anything else, because this is an example of a woman who was just living her life and was really, really good at what she did and never aspired to greatness. Greatness found her, and that's Madeleine Albright. And her autobiography, Madam Secretary, is to me like a master class in the kind of leader that I want to be. She is the one who it's not always about gender, but she pretty famously said there's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women. And she would take calls as the Secretary of State when, the Prime Minister of Great Britain was calling her, the President of Germany. But if a woman who was a leader of a small country in Africa, she often talked about Ellen Sirleaf Johnson in Liberia. If Ellen called, Madam Secretary would stop everything and take the call because she knew it was important. And there's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women. And I think she inspires me. That book inspires me a lot.
This has been a lovely conversation. I think the perfect start for my Monday. Thanks so much for investing your wisdom in us. It's been such a pleasure to meet you. And now we're going to not stop calling.
It was my pleasure. This was really fun.
All right.
Thanks so much,
I'm
Sara.
glad you didn't see the Play-Doh on the lower part of my dress.
What color is it? What color is it?
Bright fuchsia pink.
Oh,
It's
perfect.
the best.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sherry. Fantastic co-host. And
Thanks,
we will
Bridget.
see you all back at next week.
See you next.